Tracy stood outside the small drugstore, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. The cold evening air cut through her jacket, but it was nothing compared to the whirlwind of emotions and anxiety racing through her mind. She had been feeling queasy for the past several days, but today the feeling was sharper, more intense. Every morning she woke up with a swirl of nausea that refused to go away, a sensation that had gradually grown more difficult to ignore. First, she had tried to chalk it up to stress, telling herself it was just her body playing tricks on her. After all, she had a lot on her plate: college, her family's struggles, and her future uncertain in so many ways. Yet, as the days passed, the nausea refused to relent, and Tracy could no longer convince herself that it was just a temporary discomfort. Each morning, she woke up hoping the feeling would go away, but it never did. It lingered like an unwelcome guest, always present. And slowly, it began to grip her with an uncomfortable certainty. Tracy knew something was wrong, but the thought that had been lingering in the back of her mind was one she didn't want to face. What if I'm pregnant? It wasn't something she had planned for. Tracy had always been careful, thoughtful, and responsible. Yet, life had a way of throwing curveballs, and suddenly she found herself on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Her thoughts spiraled into confusion. What would she do if she were pregnant? How would she cope? How would her family react? What would he, William, the man she thought she loved, say? She couldn't afford to dwell on the endless possibilities. She had to find out the truth, once and for all. With a deep, shaky breath, Tracy pushed the door to the drugstore open. The jingle of the entrance bell did nothing to calm her nerves. She walked in, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing softly. Her eyes scanned the shelves, but it felt like everything around her had become distant, a blur. The only thing that felt real was the pounding in her chest and the sense of urgency to find the answer she needed. Tracy walked down the aisle, her footsteps quiet but deliberate. She spotted the pregnancy tests and, as if drawn by an invisible force, her hands reached out and picked up a box. She felt its weight in her hands, the small plastic package feeling heavier than it should. It was a box that represented a decision she wasn't sure she was ready for. She knew that this single item could either confirm her worst fears or offer a fleeting moment of relief. The moment she picked up the box, Tracy felt like the walls of the store were closing in on her. This was real. There was no turning back now. She had to know. She had to know what her future held. Her mind raced as she approached the counter, her hands shaking slightly as she placed the box down. The cashier, a young woman with short hair and a neutral expression, glanced down at the box, then back up at Tracy. She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Is this for you?" Her voice, though polite, carried a hint of surprise. Tracy's cheeks flushed a deep shade of red. She had expected the question, but still, it felt oddly invasive. She tried to steady herself, her voice barely a whisper as she nodded. "Yes, it is." The cashier's expression shifted slightly, her eyebrows arching ever so slightly. Instead of moving on to the next item, she leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Are you hoping to be pregnant or hoping not to be?" Tracy felt the ground beneath her feet shift. The question felt like a punch in the gut. The cold, clinical nature of it made her stomach twist. She blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself. It wasn't the question itself that had caught her off guard, But the rawness of it, the sudden reminder that she wasn't just buying a pregnancy test, but confronting the potential change in her life. Before she could respond, the cashier's gaze flicked back to the test, then back to Tracy's anxious face. The silence between them stretched for a moment too long. Tracy couldn't find the words. Her emotions were tangled in a knot, and all she could think about was the overwhelming weight of the decision she now had to make. In the end, the only thing she could manage was a quick, forced smile, an awkward attempt to deflect the conversation. Without another word, Tracy grabbed the bag containing the pregnancy test, her fingers still trembling. She couldn't bear to stay any longer. Without even offering a polite thank you, she rushed out of the store. The door slammed behind her with a force that mirrored her racing thoughts. The cool night air hit her as she stepped outside, but it did little to calm her. Instead, it felt like a harsh slap against her face. She stood there for a moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she fought to make sense of what she was feeling. She wasn't sure if it was relief or fear, but her heart seemed to be pounding even faster. Tracy glanced down at the bag in her hand, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. What was she supposed to do next? Should she go home? Should she tell William? She needed answers. Answers she wasn't sure she was ready to face. And yet, as she stood there, Tracy knew one thing for certain. The next step would change everything. Tracy walked slowly to the cafe by the riverside, her heart still racing from the events of the drugstore. As she crossed the street, her mind buzzed with the overwhelming news she had just discovered. It felt surreal to be carrying such a secret, one that had the potential to change everything in her life. Her thoughts kept drifting to William, her boyfriend, the man she had been so in love with. He was the person she envisioned sharing a future with. She had imagined telling him about the baby with excitement, joy, and love, but now she had no idea how he would react. Tracy knew that this moment was pivotal, not only for their relationship, but for her future. She pushed open the door to their usual spot, the small cafe that had become a quiet refuge for their dates. The soft hum of conversation and the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. William was already there, sitting at their usual table by the window, staring out at the river. When he saw her walk in, he gave her a small, almost absent-minded smile, not realizing the weight she was carrying. Tracy sat across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she set the bag down on the table. She could feel her heart pounding as she tried to steady herself. She wanted this moment to be perfect, to tell him the news with the excitement she had felt just hours ago when she first saw those two pink lines. But now, that excitement was tinged with fear. "William, I have something amazing to tell you," Tracy said, her voice a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She could barely contain the smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It felt like the biggest, most wonderful news to her, and she wanted to share that joy with him. William looked up from his coffee, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity but also a bit of apprehension. His attention shifted slightly, his expression unreadable. Tracy took a deep breath, her hands clutching the edges of the table for support. "We're going to have a baby," she blurted out, her voice shaky but filled with excitement. She couldn't help the smile that spread across her face, her heart swelling with the joy of finally sharing this news with him. It felt like a moment she had been dreaming of for so long. For a brief moment, there was silence. William froze, his expression flickering between confusion and disbelief. His eyes widened, and Tracy could almost feel the shock radiating off him. She waited for him to speak, but instead, he remained silent, processing her words. The silence between them stretched, and Tracy's excitement began to fade into a cold, uncomfortable feeling. "What? What do you mean, Tracy?" William finally asked, his voice hoarse, like he couldn't quite comprehend what she was saying. "A baby?" His face seemed to lose all its warmth, and his voice became edged with something Tracy couldn't quite place. Tracy's heart sank as she watched him, her smile faltering. She had expected surprise, maybe even shock, but not this. This cold distance, this uncertainty. "Yes," she replied softly. "We're going to have a baby." Her voice wavered as she said the words again, trying to make them real, trying to make them something he could accept. She needed him to be happy, to be excited, to be as ready as she was to embrace this new chapter of their lives together. But William's reaction was nothing like she expected. His face contorted with frustration, his eyes narrowing. "What were you thinking, Tracy?" he snapped, his voice rising with disbelief and irritation. "You're pregnant and you're telling me like this?" He shook his head, clearly struggling to grasp the situation. "We could have kept dating. Had fun, you know. Things were perfect between us. Why would you do this now?" Tracy's chest tightened as his words sliced through her like a blade. "William, what do you mean? I thought we were going to be together. I thought you'd be happy," she said, her voice soft but hurt. The smile that had once been so full of joy now felt foreign, a mask she could no longer wear in front of him. But William didn't soften. Instead, his expression became colder, harder. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his eyes flashing with annoyance. "You really think this is something serious? I don't want this, Tracy. I never wanted this." His words were harsh, and Tracy felt as if her world was collapsing around her. The table between them seemed to widen, like an ocean that separated their two worlds. William's words cut through the air with venom, and Tracy could barely breathe as she processed the betrayal in his voice. This wasn't what she had imagined. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with, the supportive, kind, loving William she had trusted. William continued, his tone turning crueler with every word. "Why are you so naive? Honestly, you're incredible in bed, but you just don't get life. Did you really think there was something real between us?" His words felt like daggers, each one pushing her further into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Tracy reached out across the table, her hands trembling as she searched his face for some sign of the man she had known. "William," she whispered, her voice shaky. "We were supposed to be together forever, don't you remember?" But William's laugh was cold, empty, and filled with mockery. "You really thought I'd marry you, Tracy? Are you serious?" He smirked, his words making Tracy feel small, insignificant. "I can't believe you would think that. Honestly, you're amazing in bed, but that's all you'll ever be to me." Tracy felt her heart break in real time. Her dreams of a future with him, of building a family together, were crushed in an instant. William's next words echoed in the silence, each one a brutal strike against her. You planned this, didn't you? He accused, grabbing the pregnancy test from her hand and inspecting it like it was some kind of strange artifact. You thought you could trap me with this baby. Found yourself a rich guy and thought you could take advantage, huh? His tone was full of disgust. His words so far from the truth, it was almost unreal. Tears welled up in Tracy's eyes as the harshness of his words sank in. I wasn't trying to get pregnant, William. I thought we loved each other, she pleaded, her voice breaking. But William wasn't done. He threw a few hundred bills onto the table, his face twisted in disdain. Here, take this. Get rid of the baby. I have enough problems of my own. You've ruined everything. With that, William stood up, the finality in his movement telling Tracy everything she needed to know. He was done. He was walking away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As she sat there, broken and alone, she realized that the man she thought she loved had never been who she thought he was. Tracy sat frozen at the table, the weight of William's words pressing down on her like a physical force. His anger, his bitterness, was a sharp contrast to the warmth and love she had imagined would fill their future. Her heart felt heavy, as though it had been shattered into a million pieces, each one cutting deeper into her sense of self. The small cafe, once a place of comfort and quiet affection, now felt cold, alien, and hostile. It was as if the world around her had blurred, leaving only her and William in an unbearable silence. Her mind was reeling. She had come here, expecting a moment of joy, a celebration of the life growing inside her, but instead, she had been met with accusations, anger, and rejection. She had loved him, trusted him with her dreams and her future. But in an instant, everything had changed. The man who had once made her feel safe and cherished now stood before her, throwing cruel words and judgment like daggers. Tracy's hands trembled as she wiped away the first of many tears that began to fall. She wanted to understand. She wanted to plead with him, to make him see the truth of what she had hoped for, the family they could have built together. But no matter how hard she tried, William's expression remained cold, his eyes distant and filled with a bitterness that had not been there before. I wasn't trying to get pregnant, Tracy said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt hollow in her mouth, as though they could never convey the sincerity of her intentions. She wasn't trying to trap him or manipulate him into staying. She had simply hoped for the future they had talked about, a future that now seemed impossible. But William was relentless, his anger swelling with each passing moment. You planned this all along, didn't you? He accused again, his voice cutting through the air with harshness. You found yourself some rich guy and thought you could take advantage, huh? He sneered as he spoke, his words dripping with disdain. Tracy shook her head, her chest tight with the weight of his cruelty. William, no, she pleaded. This baby, it's a gift. I didn't plan this. I thought we loved each other. Her voice cracked as she spoke, the desperation in her words growing with each attempt to reach him. But the more she tried to explain, the more distant and cold William became. He shook his head in disbelief, his expression hardening as he reached for the pregnancy test. He examined it, almost as though it were an object of scorn, as if it had no place in his life. Tracy watched him, feeling a deep ache in her chest. This was the man she had trusted, the one she had imagined a future with. And now he was looking at her and the life inside her as something unwanted, something to be discarded. "Are you serious?" William scoffed. "Why would I ever want this? We had a good thing going. I never wanted to be a part of this." His words hit her like a physical blow. Every word felt like a betrayal, and each sentence seemed to strip away the person she had once known and replaced him with someone unrecognizable. Tracy reached out across the table, her hand shaking as she tried to connect with him, to make him understand. She could barely believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. "William, we talked about this," she said, her voice shaky. "We said we were in this together. We were supposed to be a team." But William laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that filled the space between them. "We were a team? No, Tracy, I never agreed to this. You just thought you could lock me down with a baby, and now look where we are. Do you really think I'm going to marry you? Do you honestly believe this is the life I want?" His words were like ice, each one colder than the last. Tracy's heart shattered as the last of her illusions about him crumbled. She had believed that their relationship meant something, that the love they had shared was real. But now she realized she had been wrong. She had been so naive, so foolish to think that the man she loved felt the same. The man she had trusted had turned into someone unrecognizable, someone who saw her as nothing more than a mistake, a burden. She could feel the tears building in her eyes, but she refused to let him see them. She had to hold it together for her own sake, for the baby. "I thought we had something real, William. I thought you cared about me," Tracy whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her heartbreak. William didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of bills, tossing them carelessly onto the table. "Here," he said, his voice dismissive. "Take this. It's enough for you to get rid of the baby and move on. I've got enough to worry about." The cruel finality of his words hit her like a slap. Tracy sat there in stunned silence, unable to process the coldness of what he was saying. He was offering her money, as if that could fix everything, as if his cold, calculated gesture could make the pain go away. But Tracy couldn't stay here any longer. She couldn't sit across from him and pretend that everything was okay when he had just torn her heart apart. Without saying another word, she grabbed the money from the table and stood up, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. "Goodbye, William," she said softly, her voice barely audible. As she walked out of the cafe, the door slamming behind her, Tracy felt the weight of the world crashing down on her. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had shown her nothing but cruelty. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: she would never be the same again. Tracy's heart pounded as she walked away from the cafe, the weight of William's betrayal still fresh in her mind. Each step felt like a slow march, her feet moving automatically as her thoughts spiraled in a chaotic frenzy. The money William had thrown at her felt heavy in her hand, a cold reminder of the cruelty he had shown. She couldn't understand how someone who had once claimed to love her could turn so harsh, so distant. His words echoed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. He had rejected her, rejected their future, and now she was left alone, struggling to make sense of it all. She couldn't go back to her apartment yet. The walls felt like they were closing in on her, and she needed space to think, to process. She walked aimlessly through the streets, her mind racing with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. What would she do now? How could she face her family? How could she handle the overwhelming responsibility of being pregnant, alone, with no support from the person she thought would be by her side? The city streets around her were a blur. People moved in and out of shops, talking, laughing, going about their day. But Tracy felt like she was moving in slow motion, trapped in her own personal nightmare. She couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. Everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped for, seemed to be slipping through her fingers. She knew what William had said was final. He had rejected her and the baby, and there was no going back. As much as she wanted to turn to him, to convince him that they could still make this work, she knew it would never happen. William had made it clear that he had no interest in being part of her life anymore. She had to face the reality of the situation on her own. Her steps took her to a small park, a quiet corner of the city where she used to walk when she wanted to clear her mind. She sat down on a bench, the cool air biting at her skin as she stared blankly at the ground. She clutched the money in her hand, turning it over and over, as if the bills could somehow offer her an answer. She couldn't help but feel disgusted by it. William had treated her like she was disposable, like the baby was something to be erased, and this money was his attempt to buy his way out of responsibility. Tears began to well up in her eyes as the reality of what had happened hit her all over again. She had never imagined that she would be in this position. The thought of getting an abortion crossed her mind again, but it felt wrong. She wasn't a monster. She couldn't just end the life growing inside her. This wasn't the path she had ever wanted, but now it was the only one that lay before her. She wiped her tears away and took a deep breath, trying to clear her head. The decision wasn't just about what was best for her. It was about what was best for the baby. She had been given a gift, a life to protect and cherish, and despite the overwhelming fear and uncertainty, she couldn't bring herself to end it. The baby deserved a chance at life. It didn't matter that she was alone or scared. She would find a way to make it work. But what about her family? How could she tell them? How would they react to the news that she was pregnant and alone? Tracy knew they would be disappointed, especially her mother. Olivia had always been her rock, the one person who had been there for her through thick and thin. But would she understand? Would she be able to support her? Or would she see this as a failure on Tracy's part? The idea of returning home felt daunting, but it was the only place she could go. Her family might be disappointed, but they loved her. They would help her, even if it wasn't easy. Tracy had always taken care of others, had always been the one to hold things together. But now, it was time for her to lean on them. She couldn't face this alone. With newfound resolve, Tracy stood up from the bench, her heart a little heavier, but filled with a sense of purpose. She needed to make a choice, one that would shape her future. The road ahead would be difficult, but she would find a way to make it work. She couldn't change what had happened with William, but she could change the way she moved forward. As she walked back through the streets, the world felt a little less heavy. She had made a decision. The baby would have a chance at life, and Tracy would do whatever it took to make sure that life was a good one. She didn't know how she would navigate the challenges ahead, but she was no stranger to hardship. She had survived everything life had thrown at her so far, and this would be no different. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Tracy was no longer waiting for someone else to save her. She would save herself for the sake of her baby, and she would build a new future, one step at a time. The city's streets were dimly lit as Tracy walked, the cold breeze nipping at her cheeks. She had no destination in mind, only a need to escape, to find some space where her thoughts wouldn't overwhelm her. The confrontation with William still lingered in her mind, the sharpness of his words cutting deeper the more she replayed the events in her head. Every insult, every dismissive glance seemed to echo in her chest, a constant reminder of how far she had fallen from the man she thought she loved. Her feet moved on autopilot as she walked through the streets, the sounds of the city muffled by the loud thrum of her racing heart. She couldn't understand why things had turned out this way. How had everything she thought she knew about love and relationships been so wrong? William had promised her a future. They had talked about what their life together would look like. And now it felt like everything she had built up in her mind was crashing down around her. Tracy felt nauseous again, the familiar wave of sickness sweeping over her. She paused, leaning against a lamppost for support, feeling the weight of the pregnancy test in her bag. She hadn't been prepared for any of this. The responsibility, the fear, and the heartbreak, it was all too much. But the thought of ending the pregnancy, of taking the easy way out as William had suggested, didn't sit right with her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this baby was a blessing, something precious, even though her circumstances were anything but ideal. But in that moment, Tracy felt lost, unsure of which path to take. As she stood there, lost in thought, a man walked past her, his small grocery bag hanging loosely in his hand. Tracy didn't notice him at first, too consumed by her own thoughts. But then, he stopped in his tracks and turned toward her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but genuine. Tracy looked up in surprise. The man was in his early 30s, his face kind and concerned. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the question. She hadn't expected anyone to speak to her, let alone show concern. "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks," she replied, trying to brush it off. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want anyone to know how broken she felt, how confused she was. But the man didn't move away. Instead, he stood there, waiting for her to say more, his gaze patient and kind. Tracy hesitated, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Her head felt heavy, and she suddenly realized how long she had been walking without any real purpose. Her legs were starting to feel weak, and the dizziness from her earlier nausea was creeping back. She swayed slightly, trying to steady herself, but before she knew it, she stumbled, her balance lost. The man reached out instinctively, his hand steadying her before she could fall. "Whoa, careful there. Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Tracy blinked, trying to shake off the dizziness. "I'm just a little dizzy," she murmured, feeling embarrassed. She hadn't realized how bad her condition had gotten. The man's brow furrowed with worry. "No, this isn't okay. You need to sit down. Where do you live?" Tracy tried to protest, but her legs felt like they were made of jelly. She had no strength to argue. "I'm at the dorms, but I don't need any help," she said, weakly. She had no desire to burden a stranger, especially with everything she was going through. But the man wasn't taking no for an answer. "You're not walking back to your dorm in this state," he said firmly. "Come on, let's get you something to eat and get you off your feet." Tracy hesitated, looking down at the ground, her emotions swirling. She had spent so much time trying to handle everything on her own, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone. But in this moment, she realized how much she did need someone. A listening ear, a kind gesture, anything. To help her feel less alone, she nodded slowly, too exhausted to argue. "Okay," she said quietly. The man smiled, his eyes warm with kindness. "Great. My place is just around the corner. It's not far." He motioned for her to follow him, and she did, feeling a strange sense of comfort in his presence. For the first time in what felt like forever, Tracy allowed herself to let go of some of the weight she had been carrying. As they walked, the man introduced himself. "I'm Richard, by the way," he said. "What's your name?" "Tracy," she replied, her voice still soft but more steady now that she wasn't standing alone on the street. "Well, Tracy," Richard said with a smile, "it's nice to meet you. You're in good hands now." They walked in silence for a few minutes, and Tracy couldn't help but notice how calm Richard seemed, how at ease he was with helping her. There was no judgment, no questions, just a quiet understanding. It was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. When they arrived at his apartment, Richard ushered her inside. Tracy was immediately struck by the warmth of the space, the cozy atmosphere created by the soft lighting and shelves filled with books. She felt like she had walked into a world completely different from her own, one that was calm, safe, and welcoming. "Make yourself comfortable," Richard said, gesturing toward a small sofa. "I'll grab you something to drink." Tracy sat down, feeling the exhaustion in her body as she sank into the cushions. She glanced around, her gaze landing on the shelves filled with medical books, anatomy textbooks, and journals. She was intrigued by them, but also felt a strange sense of familiarity. She had always admired people who worked in the medical field, who could help others with their expertise. Richard returned with 2 cups of tea, setting one down in front of Tracy. "Here you go. Drink this, and it'll help you feel better," he said with a gentle smile. They sat down together, sipping their tea in silence, and for the first time in a long time, Tracy felt a small sense of peace. Richard didn't ask questions or push her to talk. He simply allowed her the space to breathe and collect herself. As the evening wore on, Richard spoke more about his life, his work, and his interests. Tracy found herself listening intently, drawn to his quiet confidence and the way he seemed to genuinely care about others. There was something calming about him, something that made Tracy feel like she could be herself without fear of judgment. Eventually, the conversation shifted, and Tracy found herself talking about her life, her struggles, and her recent heartbreak. Richard listened attentively, offering no judgment, just quiet understanding. For the first time, Tracy felt like someone truly cared. By the time the evening ended, Tracy realized something profound. She wasn't alone. There were still good people in the world, people who cared without expecting anything in return. And in that moment, Tracy knew she would find the strength to move forward, even if it meant doing it alone. The weeks following her night at Richard's apartment were a blur for Tracy. She had spent so much time wrestling with her emotions, trying to come to terms with everything that had happened. Her pregnancy, the heartbreaking breakup with William, and the uncertainty about her future. Yet through all of it, there was one thing that kept coming back to her: Richard. After their conversation that evening, Tracy had felt a sense of relief. For the first time in ages, she had shared her pain with someone, and for the first time, in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world on her own. Richard had listened, truly listened, without judgment. His kindness had reminded her that there were still good people out there, people who cared. That evening had been a turning point, not just for Tracy's emotional state, but also in her understanding of what it meant to open up to others. Richard didn't push her for more information. He didn't ask about William or press her to talk about the difficult decisions ahead. Instead, he had created a space where Tracy could simply be. There was something calming about Richard's presence, something steady and reliable. As much as she tried to ignore it, Tracy couldn't help but think about him often. Tracy had started to visit Richard more frequently, often after long days of studying or working. He didn't live far from her, and she found herself gravitating toward his apartment like a magnet. Sometimes they would sit in his cozy living room, drinking tea or coffee, talking about their lives and the world around them. The conversations were easy, comfortable, and the connection between them began to deepen in ways Tracy hadn't expected. It wasn't just his quiet demeanor or the way he listened to her that made her feel comfortable. It was his genuine interest in her as a person. He never made her feel like a burden, never looked at her like she was broken or flawed. With Richard, Tracy felt like she was seen for who she truly was, not the broken girl who had been rejected by William or the scared pregnant woman facing an uncertain future. He respected her, and for the first time in months, Tracy felt like she was allowed to take up space. But as much as she enjoyed their time together, Tracy remained guarded. She couldn't let herself forget that she was pregnant, that her life was already complicated, and that she wasn't looking for a relationship right now. She had too much to figure out, too many decisions to make about her future. But the feelings she had for Richard, feelings that she tried to suppress, began to grow stronger with each passing day. One evening, after a long week of studying and juggling her responsibilities, Tracy found herself again at Richard's apartment. She had texted him, asking if she could come over, and he had immediately replied with a warm invitation. She arrived tired, her mind overwhelmed, but his presence always seemed to have a calming effect on her. They sat down, as usual, with cups of tea between them, and started talking about everything and nothing at all. After some time, Richard spoke softly, as though he was weighing his words carefully. "Tracy, I've been thinking a lot about you," he began, his voice gentle but serious. Tracy paused, looking at him, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart suddenly racing in her chest. Richard shifted in his seat, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "I know things haven't been easy for you lately, and I get that you're facing a lot on your own, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I care about you, Tracy, and I don't just mean as a friend," he added, his voice laced with vulnerability. Tracy's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had always known there was a connection between them, but she had kept it at arm's length, unsure of her own feelings and where this could go. I care about you too, Richard, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. But I'm not ready for anything like that. I have a lot of things I need to figure out. Richard nodded, his expression softening. I understand. You've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush anything. But I want you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to, or if you just need a friend, I'm here. No matter what. His words hit her harder than she expected. There was something about the way Richard spoke that made her believe him, that made her feel like, maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in the world. Tracy had spent so much of her life relying on herself, holding everything together, but in that moment, she realized that letting someone else in, someone like Richard, might not be as scary as she had once thought. As the evening continued, they shared more laughter, more conversation, and without even realizing it, Tracy found herself more comfortable than she had been in months. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean on someone else. She didn't have to be strong all the time. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. Richard had made that clear. Later that night, as Tracy left Richard's apartment, she felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. There was still so much uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a companion. Richard had offered her something more than just friendship. He had offered her understanding, kindness, and perhaps a chance at a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The connection between them had deepened, and Tracy couldn't help but feel like this was the beginning of something more, something real. But for now, she was content to take things one step at a time. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to have everything figured out. With Richard by her side, she felt like she could face whatever came next. And, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope for a better future. The weeks that followed Tracy's heartfelt conversations with Richard marked a new chapter in her life. She felt an undeniable sense of calm when she was with him, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. While she had still been struggling to figure out how she would navigate her pregnancy, her studies, and her uncertain future, Richard's presence offered her a quiet refuge. There was something uniquely comforting about him. His calm demeanor, his reassuring smile, and his ability to listen without judgment. Yet, despite her growing affection for him, Tracy kept her guard up. She wasn't looking for a relationship right now. Her life was already complicated enough. But Richard wasn't one to shy away from hard conversations, especially when it came to his feelings. One evening, as they sat together on the couch in his apartment, sipping tea and talking about the future, Richard turned to Tracy with a serious look on his face. The mood shifted, and Tracy immediately sensed that he was about to say something important. "Tracy," Richard began, his voice steady but laced with a hint of nervousness. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about your situation, about everything you're going through, and I want to be clear about something." Tracy's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what he meant, but she had a sinking feeling that whatever was coming next would change everything. "I know things are complicated," Richard continued, "and I know you're facing a lot of uncertainty, but I want to help you. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I have an offer for you. It's unusual, but I think it could work for both of us." Tracy's mind raced. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the tension in the air was palpable. "What kind of offer?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of hesitation. Richard took a deep breath, as though preparing himself for what he was about to say. "I've been accepted into a prestigious medical program," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "The thing is, in order to qualify for some of the scholarships and financial benefits, I need to be married and have a child. It's part of the program's requirements." Tracy stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "Married and have a child?" she repeated, her voice soft with disbelief. "But you already have everything you need. You're successful, Richard. You don't need to—" Richard held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "I know it sounds strange, but hear me out. The program is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. And I know this may seem like an odd solution, but if you marry me, we could both benefit. You'll have the support you need for your baby, and I'll get the benefits of being married with a child to qualify for the scholarships." Tracy blinked, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought they were just friends, maybe something more eventually. But not this. This felt like a business proposition rather than an offer of love or affection. Richard, sensing her confusion, continued. "I understand if this seems too forward, but the reality is, I care about you, Tracy. I'm not asking you to marry me because of the program alone. I want to help you, and I think we can make this work. We'd be a team, and after 3 years, you can choose what to do, whether you stay with me or go back to your life. I'm not looking to trap you. I just want to offer you a chance to build a stable future for you and your baby." Tracy was silent for a long moment, her mind reeling. Richard's proposal was unconventional, to say the least, but it came from a place of genuine concern. He wasn't pressuring her to make any decisions on the spot. He was simply offering a solution to a difficult situation. And as strange as it seemed, the more she thought about it, the more practical it appeared. She didn't have many options. Being a single mother in college was already going to be incredibly difficult, and the idea of having some financial support, as well as stability for her child, was tempting. Richard had offered her an out, a way to ensure her baby would have a future, without facing the harsh realities of the world on her own. "I don't know, Richard," Tracy said softly, her voice unsure. "This feels like a big step. I never imagined I'd be in this situation, let alone marry someone under these circumstances. I don't know if I'm ready for all of that." Richard nodded, his expression softening with understanding. "I get it. This isn't easy. But I'm not asking for anything other than the chance to help you. And I won't push you to decide now. Take your time. I just wanted you to know that the option is there. If you ever feel like it might work for you, I'll be here." Tracy's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions. She wasn't ready to make any decisions right away, but she couldn't ignore the kindness Richard had shown her. This offer, however unusual, was his way of offering support, something Tracy had been desperately needing since her breakup with William. Richard wasn't just offering her a marriage of convenience, he was offering her a partnership. Over the next few days, Tracy thought long and hard about Richard's proposal. Her head swirled with conflicting thoughts, her independence, the idea of raising her child alone, and the promise of a new opportunity. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this might be the only chance she had to build a secure future for her child. With Richard, she wouldn't be alone in this journey. She would have someone who genuinely cared about her and her well-being. Someone who wasn't asking for anything in return except a chance to work together. Finally, after days of contemplation, Tracy made her decision. She would take Richard up on his offer. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a solution nonetheless. A chance to give her child a stable, loving environment and to pursue the future she had always dreamed of. She didn't know where this decision would lead, but she was willing to take the leap. She called Richard and asked to meet him at his apartment. When she arrived, she found him waiting for her with a hopeful smile. Tracy looked into his eyes and, with a deep breath, said, "I'll marry you, Richard. Let's do this. For the baby." Richard's smile widened, and he reached out to gently take her hand. "Thank you, Tracy. I promise. We'll make it work." In that moment, Tracy felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't the future she had envisioned, but it was a future full of possibilities, one step closer to the stability and love she had always craved. The years that followed Tracy's decision to marry Richard were filled with change. The unconventional arrangement they had made had started to feel more like a real partnership than either of them had expected. What had started as a marriage of convenience, based on necessity and circumstance, had blossomed into something deeper, more meaningful. They had supported each other through the trials of medical school, the challenges of raising their child, and the complex emotions of being partners in more ways than one. Despite the oddity of their beginning, Tracy felt secure with Richard in a way she had never felt before, especially after the chaos of her past relationship with William. Tracy had grown, not only as a mother, but also as a person. She had discovered new strengths within herself, strengths that she had never known existed. But no matter how far she moved from her painful past, it still lingered in the corners of her mind. The memories of William's rejection, his cold words, and the hurtful things he had said to her remained fresh, a scar that hadn't quite healed. One day, while walking through the hospital where she now worked as a surgeon, Tracy was summoned to perform a surgery on a new patient. She was busy, focused on her tasks, but something about the name on the chart caught her attention. William Miller. Her heart skipped a beat as she read it again, making sure she wasn't imagining it. She hadn't heard from him in years, hadn't even thought about him. But there it was, right in front of her. William, the man who had once meant everything to her, now lying in a hospital bed needing her help. Tracy's mind raced as she stood there in the sterile corridor. What were the odds? She had avoided thinking about William for so long, but now, in the very place where she had built her new life, their paths were crossing again. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. She couldn't avoid this forever. Despite the anger, the hurt, and the lingering resentment she felt toward him, her sense of duty as a doctor pushed her forward. She couldn't turn away from a patient in need, no matter who they were. With a deep breath, Tracy prepared herself to enter the operating room. She had come so far in her life. She was a successful surgeon, a loving wife, and a mother to a child she adored. William was no longer the central figure in her life, but the bitterness he had left in her heart was still there, quietly simmering beneath the surface. As she entered the operating room and saw William on the table, unconscious and vulnerable, her emotions were a tangled mess. His condition was serious. The ulcer that had plagued him for so long had worsened, and now he needed immediate surgery to prevent further complications. As Tracy examined his file, she couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. The once confident, arrogant man she had known seemed like a stranger now. He had aged, his once vibrant eyes now shadowed with exhaustion and pain. The cruel words he had spoken to her all those years ago suddenly felt like distant echoes, their sting softened by time. But the memories of that painful breakup still lingered, and Tracy had a hard time suppressing the feelings of resentment that bubbled up whenever she thought of him. But she was a professional. As a doctor, she had taken an oath to care for her patients, no matter who they were or what their past was. And so, she pushed aside her personal feelings, focusing on the task at hand. She prepped for the surgery, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside. When the procedure was over and William was stable, Tracy found herself standing outside the operating room, her mind racing. She had done her job. He was going to be okay. But the emotional weight of the situation was heavy. She couldn't help but wonder if William ever thought about their past, about the way he had treated her. Did he regret it? Did he ever feel sorry for the pain he had caused her? The following days were filled with tension as Tracy avoided seeing William in his recovery room. She had performed the surgery, but she didn't feel ready to face him. Every part of her wanted to stay distant, to keep the emotional barrier between them firmly intact. But she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. He had come to her for help. And now it was her turn to face him. When she finally walked into his room, she was met with a quiet silence. William's eyes widened as he saw her, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. She could see the shock in his expression, the disbelief that she was the one who had saved his life. But as the silence stretched, Tracy felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure she wanted to say anything at all. "Tracy," William said softly, his voice strained with pain but tinged with something else. Guilt? Regret? She wasn't sure. "I didn't expect you to be the one. I never thought you'd be the one to save you," Tracy finished, her voice firm but calm. She couldn't let him guilt trip her into thinking she had done it for him. She had done it because it was her job, because it was her responsibility to help those in need, no matter their past. William hesitated, then lowered his gaze. "I know I hurt you, Tracy, and I'm sorry for that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I was selfish, and I can't undo the things I did. But I want you to know that I regret it. I regret losing you." Tracy stood still, her heart a mixture of emotions. She had heard the words she had longed to hear from him, words that, in another life, might have meant everything. But the years had passed, and too much had changed. She had moved on. She had built a life without him, and she wasn't going to let his apology change that. "I appreciate the apology, William," she said, her voice steady, "but I've moved on. I have a family now, a life I'm proud of. You can't just come back into my life because it's convenient for you. I've learned to let go, and I'm not going to let your mistakes define me anymore." William looked at her, his face a mask of regret. "I understand," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything." Tracy nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of their shared past. "Goodbye, William. I hope you can find peace with yourself," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. As Tracy walked out of the room, she felt a strange sense of closure. The weight of the past had been lifted, and with it, the final remnants of the pain William had caused her. She had faced her past, confronted it head-on, and walked away stronger for it. As she left the hospital that day, she felt the deep sense of peace she had been searching for. She had built a new life, one that was hers and hers, alone. And no one, not even William, could take that away from her. She was finally free.